sombering news for coffee lovers, and that is because Nestle India and CCL product owners have now increased prices of coffee. They are owners of Nescafe and Continental Coffee. They've gone ahead and hiked instant coffee prices over spike in input costs. My colleague Anjali is now joining us with all the details. Anjali, what are you picking up?
If you love your morning cup of coffee, then get ready to pay more for this jar. The prices of instant coffee from brands like Nestle and Continental Coffee have seen multiple price hikes throughout the year on the back of the rising commodity prices of coffee. We gather from sources that Nestle has taken 4 price hikes this year every quarter. So the 45-gram jar of coffee, which used to cost 180 rupees at the start of the year, now costs 230 rupees, the latest being a 15 rupee hike. As for the 90-gram packet, which used to cost 350 rupees at the start of the year, now costs 440 rupees. The larger packs like the 180-gram coffee, which now retails for 890 rupees, started off at the start of the year as a 190-gram packet. So there has been a grammage reduction of 10 grams and the price used to be 680, which is now 890, the latest being a 120 rupee hike. As for the smaller packets like the 2 rupees sachet, there has been grammage reduction. So from 1.2 grams at the start of the year, now a 2 rupee packet only has 0.9 grams. Nestle says that pricing is the last option for them and the rising prices have led to these price hikes. As for CCL products, they've also taken 15 to 20% hike on their products. They say that the input prices have increased by 15 to 20% too. In their smaller sachets also, they have taken some grammage reduction. Now, Nestle as well as Continental Coffee and other brands have been battling very high input costs on the back of the rising commodity prices of green coffee.
Be ready to pay more for your morning cup of coffee. Exclusive details coming in. Thank you, Anjali, for joining us with all those details. Let's take that point further and discuss the implications of surge in coffee prices on you and me as consumers of coffee. How soon could the impact of surge in coffee prices be passed on to consumers, and whether there has been a shift in consumer behavior? To discuss all this and more, we now have Mr. Praveen Jaipuriar, CEO of CCL Products India Limited, now joining us. Sir, thank you so much for taking your time out and speaking with us here on ET Now. Global coffee prices, we believe, have surged a lot over the last few months. How will this affect the company, and are you planning on undertaking price hikes? As per reports, we understand that the company is undertaking price hikes. How much of it will be passed on to the consumer?
So basically, we work on a cost plus model, which means that any increase in the raw material price, most of it we pass it on to the customers. So as far as the margins are concerned, we don't get affected a lot. But having said so, what happens during these times is that the buyers become a little tentative, and they generally are in a wait and watch, because at these price levels, everybody is expecting the prices to come down in the future or in the near future. So they are very, in a wait and watch mode. They are very non-committal as far as long-term contracts are concerned. And that's why, they'll be very short on their contracts. They'll be only asking for current requirements. So that is the change in business that comes in, which may probably affect our, production planning and things like that. But otherwise, as far as the margins are concerned, that doesn't have an impact on our business.
Understood. So CCL Products works on cost plus model, but what percentage of your overall cost base is directly impacted by fluctuations in coffee bean prices, and how do you hedge against these risks?
So we don't hedge at all. The day we get the contract, we end up buying coffee on that day itself. So, suppose a client is asking for a price today, I'll quote him the price basis today's green coffee prices. And if the client was to confirm the contract, we would go ahead and buy the required amount of coffee today itself, so that there is no, effect of any fluctuations later on, both for us or for the client. So that's the model that we have been operating for many years, which means that we need not hedge for anything. And as far as the cost is concerned, generally green coffee almost constitutes 70% or so. The cost is from the green coffee. So it's pretty high. And that's the reason we don't want to take any risk as far as the fluctuations are concerned in the coffee prices. And therefore, we end up buying the coffee that day itself. So it's a back-to-back buying for us.
It's back-to-back buying for us, and hence you all don't hedge against rising global coffee prices. But global coffee prices recently touched 47-year high on the back of supply concerns from Brazil and Vietnam, which is the top two coffee producing countries globally. What's the outlook with respect to global coffee price trajectory going forward, and do you expect prices to cool down, or perhaps they could inch higher even from current levels?
So, as far as the expectation, or I say what is going to happen, I think all the predictions have failed till now for the last 2 years, because everybody, including the traders, the manufacturers, the buyers, all of them expected that the coffee prices will soften. But instead of softening, it has kept increasing over a period of time. Therefore, it is very hard to predict. But if you ask me personally that what do I feel, I don't see coffee prices softening in the near future. It may take some more time, because it's also a matter of the juxtaposition, or say the play between demand and supply. And what has happened is that the demand has remained intact. We haven't seen any demand contraction because of high prices, which means that whenever there is a supply constraint, and which has happened, earlier with Brazil, the Brazil crop getting affected, and now with Vietnam, news of Vietnam crop getting affected. The supply constraints are there, and but the demand has remained intact, which has meant that the prices have increased to the levels that it has today. And I don't see this trend changing a lot, because we haven't seen any very increased amount of supply that is coming into the market. Once that happens, the prices could soften. So therefore, in near term, my view is that prices are not going to soften too much. Even if it is to soften, it will soften only a little.
All right, so you do not expect coffee prices to soften at least in the near term. But as far as CCL Products is concerned, you've guided for about 10 to 20% growth this year. On the back of the surge in coffee prices that we have seen this year so far, would you want to revisit your guidance?
No, not really. I think first half has, we have already completed first half, and we are pretty much on track. There could be some quarter variations here or there, but largely we think that we will be able to kind of, meet the guidance that we had given.
So you're saying that you will be able to meet your guidance for the full year despite the surge in coffee prices, and first half has been on track. But given the rise in coffee prices, do you foresee a shift in consumer behavior, such as reduction in consumption or perhaps preference for lower priced offerings?
So as far as the broad consumption levels are concerned, we haven't seen any sort of contraction. People are still drinking coffee. That's also, in a way, a good sign for us, because as long as consumption is not impacted, the other things, such other supply chain challenges, can be managed. So that is something that we are seeing. But yes, there is some interplay between types of coffee. Last 2 years, we have seen that, previous to that, a lot of growth was coming from freeze-dried coffee when the green coffee prices were low and people were upgrading. But we have seen the demand coming back to the spray dried, because there seems to be a little downgradation. But my sense is that, first and foremost, because the most expensive coffee consumption is out of home. The in-home coffee consumption, the price increases are, manageable, so as to say. Because let me give you an example. Let's say if an out of home you drink a coffee which is, let's say, 250 rupees a cup, and the prices go up, the out of home consumption or the coffee chains may take it to 300 rupees. That's a substantial increase. But let's say at home, your per cup coffee cost could be maybe 8 to 10 rupees. So that may go up to 12 to 14 rupees. So the pinch in per cup doesn't look very, very stark when it comes to in-home consumption. So therefore, even if the consumption contraction may happen, we could see some contraction happening in out of home. But in home, which is largely the instant coffee consumption area where we operate, I don't see any consumer behavior change as far as consumption is concerned.
In-home coffee consumption continues to remain intact and we are not seeing any trends changing as far as that is concerned. But over the medium to long term, how do you expect demand trends to shape up both in the domestic as well as in the global markets, say over the next 5 to 7 years?
So if you see the coffee global scenario, you will see that the large consuming countries are the American countries and the European countries. Yes, they are the large consumer. Their per capita consumption of coffee is very high, and these markets are generally saturated markets, not just for coffee, but most of the consumer goods. So not a lot of growth is not going to happen from these countries. However, countries like China and India which have huge population. These countries are now seeing growth in coffee. And both these countries were traditionally tea drinking countries, which is now taking up to coffee. And the kind of coffee consumption or the number of cafes that now we see coming up, mushrooming in both these countries is huge. And this out of home consumption, and this generally happens with food categories that, first out of home consumption happens and then that consumption pattern gets to the taste of people, it gets onto your tongue, so the next generation they start consuming in home as well. So I see that these two blocks, which is China and India, they are going to drive the next phase of growth of coffee, which is good news because these are the two largest economies and these are the economies which are going to grow in the next couple of decades and drive consumption for a lot of categories. So these are good signs for coffee industry.
Good signs for the coffee industry. That's the word coming in. Mr. Jaipuriar, thank you so much for taking your time out and speaking with us here on ET Now and helping us understand what the implications of surging coffee prices globally will be on us as coffee consumers. Thank you for joining us. Shifting focus then, and all eyes are on Federal Reserve outcome, which is expected to come in later tonight. Street is penciling in about 97% chance of 25 basis point rate cut. Most importantly, all eyes will be on updated rate projections for 2025. Economists are not projecting fewer rate cuts for 2025. Inflation, remember, has stayed stubbornly above Federal Reserve's goal of 2% annual rate. So keep an eye out on this important update which will come in later tonight, and it will have an impact not only on global equity and fixed income market, but it will also have implications on commodity market, especially precious metals. Shifting focus to our next segment, Did You Know? And today we put the spotlight on turmeric because turmeric is native to Southeast Asia and originated in southern India about 4,000 years ago. There are more than 50 varieties of turmeric and each has its own distinct medical property. Turmeric is recognized as a miraculous substance in Ayurveda since ancient times. Those are some of the interesting facts and figures for turmeric, but that's all the time we have on this edition of the show. You don't go anywhere. Stay tuned to ET Now.
If you like this video, then like, share and subscribe to ET Now.